Hi everybody, I'm Jack the Rambling Raconteur. I hope that you're doing well. I hope you're having a great start to this week. For my first foray into subgenre September and mid-year mystery madness, the host of which I will link in the channel notes below, I'd like to discuss Fool's Gold by Dolores Hitchens. An absolutely brutal book, a sharp and incisive slice of nearly nihilistic noir. A book that understands, and in which Hitchens, as a writer of crime novels, understands that crime is not cool, heists are not sexy, burglaries are not, romantic. But that crime amplifies human misery, and that the best crime novels are often horror novels without any supernatural elements. And that's something Hitchens captures in this book. The sense of desperation, the sense of sudden violence, of fear and dread that just gathers around characters. Both those committing the crime, the victims of the crime, and those sort of in the periphery who are encountering that. There's just this sense of dread and tension that fills the book, and it's almost unremitting. It's nearly nihilistic noir. It's not totally bleak. It's this side of the hopeful side of James Cain and David Goodis and some of those, but it's right there on the line where they're at, and it's well written. It's a very effective crime novel set in 1958 in Pasadena, and then shifting over to a couple of chapters in Las Vegas during that time, and Reno, which are kind of interesting insights, into certainly a place that no longer exists, certainly within that context, the context of this book. But it's excellent and truly horrifying, but it's also really well written. So I'd like to just read a couple paragraphs. The first time they drove by the house, Eddie was so scared he ducked his head down. Skip laughed at him. Above the rattling of the motor, Skip jeered, "What's the matter with you? Afraid the old woman's got x-ray eyes or something? She's a mind reader, maybe. She's looking out now and spotting us. You nuts?" What he really meant, as Eddie knew, was that Eddie was chicken. Now they were past the house, headed downhill past empty lots. Eddie cast a glance back. Hell, it's such a doggone big place, that's all. Important looking. And in this hour of near twilight, in his opinion, kind of spooky and ominous. The bigger they come, the harder they fall, Skip pronounced. He was peering ahead to the corner where the side street entered the main boulevard from Pasadena. Suddenly, he chucked Eddie in the ribs. "Hey, there's the chick now." His tone had taken on a certain confidential excitement. And so that introduces us to Skip and Eddie, who are two of the fools who are after some gold here, in the form of some cash that they've heard about that's stuffed in a wardrobe in a room in this enormous, house out in Pasadena. And they know Skip's girlfriend, is sort of in a ward of the older woman who owns the house. And there's no relation, but it's sort of a ward. They're taking some night school classes together as adults, and he's gonna use that information. Skip's a bad dude, and it's very clear early on. And what we see characters who are totally embracing crime. They are embracing the misery. They are embracing the violence, and perpetuating. They're amplifying that misery. And they have no hope. They're totally selfish. They have no sense of anyone else's place in the world or in society. They're just after what they can get. And there are other characters who, as they see crime, as they become conscious of what it actually means, of how much damage is occurring, what are the choices they make? There are characters who are sort of like on this path of just absolute brutality. Other characters who have to determine, are they going to take that path or are they going to take another path? And what are those consequences? What is the fallout? When you've been present at a crime and acts of horrifying violence. And that's what Hitchens explores, is not just the crime, not just, dwindling or burgeoning romance between young adults who are involved in crime or who are on the fringe of society. Not just, the question of, is there going to be a criminal who's going to pull one last job, but really the consciousness of characters as they realize the consequences, as they begin to grasp what has actually occurred, and how do they reconcile their futures and their lives with that past, that very immediate past. And Hitchens really probes, really explores that. It was a fantastic book. As I said, it was very, very dark. But there are glimmers of light. There are little diamonds across the book that reflect just enough light back to keep me going as I was reading it, because it was dark. One of the things that's also really interesting, and one of the things that's great about this particular volume, the Library of America had reprinted. These are 4 crime novels from the 1950s. There's another volume 4 from the 1940s. One of the things that's really interesting is how the character of Karen, who's this young adult woman, who's the ward, and what she's seeing, the fear she feels, the violence that can be done to her on a whim, and how she tries to understand that and grows in her understanding of what that can mean for her, how dangerous that actually can be for her, is something that I think Hitchens grasps in a way that so many of our other crime writers, for a patently obvious reason, often struggle to grasp. And so that provides a unique sort of perspective across the novel, as much as we're focused on Skip and Eddie and their choices and the choices of other men around them. Karen and the voice she has, the consciousness she has as a character, is something that I think elevates Fool's Gold above so many other novels from that era and even through the past 60-70 years. So it's one that I certainly would recommend. I've read 3 of the 4 in this volume now. The only one I haven't is The Blunderer by Patricia Highsmith, who's an amazing writer, so I have no doubt it's excellent. But the other 3, Mischief and Beast in View, are both excellent, and Fool's Gold is right up there along with them. So this is a volume as a whole that I absolutely adore. I'm going to be rereading these in future years, but I certainly recommend Fool's Gold. And in terms of some other books, I had mentioned David Goodis, and there is that sense of just deep darkness, of characters who just don't care about anyone, and what they're willing to do to advance their own interests. And The Burglar is the most recent David Goodis book I've read that certainly feels that way. But his book Down There, which is in the crime novels American Noir of the 1950s, also by Library of America, and Down There was famously shot as Shoot the Piano Player by Francois Truffaut. So it's kind of known by that name. But that's another example, or Pickup by Charles Willeford. Those are other examples of books that show just what crime really is, and that it is horror. Another one that came to mind was the doubly dark Black Wings Has My Angel by Elliott Chaze. This book is vicious. This is darker than Goodis and James Cain, I think, in many ways. And there are elements in which Fool's Gold feels almost a twin to Black Wings Has My Angel, except for these tiny little divergences that ultimately make the books feel worlds apart at their ending. But throughout the book, the narratives that each have and the effects that crime has within them they're fascinating parallels. Jim Thompson, I think, has some of the darkest, and I think his books truly are like nihilistic. They're, to a point there, he might be my least favorite of like the major crime novelists. Richard Stark, real name Donald Westlake, wrote the whole Parker series about a heist guy. And most of those are focused just on the heist, but one like the Jugger is a good example of one where Parker's sort of facing consequences beyond just a single heist or a single crime, and realizing how his associates are wrapped up in that as well. Not a crime novel, but one that I was reminded of in terms of like that desperation of California. We think of California, we think of Hollywood, especially with the 50s and 60s and into the early 60s. We think of surfing and the Beach Boys music and just how fun that is. But there's also hunger. There's the people who have to work on the farms, the migrant workers. There are the people who live off of Skid Row. There are the people who haven't made it in Hollywood. And a book like Fat City by Leonard Gardner shows journeyman boxers and farm workers who are living that life, who are feeling that side of the California dream as nightmare. And I think that's something that Hitchens, with setting it just outside of LA in a time where before all the big freeways, Pasadena felt separate from LA. It wasn't just this massive megalopolis. And there's a little bit of distance. There's homes being built around the different neighborhoods, and that just gives it a feel for a time and a place that's really lost, just as the chapters set in Reno and Las Vegas do as well. In terms of, I was reminded of during the actual burglary and the violence, I was reminded of Crime and Punishment and the way it feels when Raskolnikov commits his burglary and commits the murders. And the horror he feels in that moment, realizing this was not what I had anticipated it being, and then of course his working out what that means for the rest of his life. is present. And then when I read Dead Girls by Selva Almada last month, that of course brought in this perspective of how dangerous so many moments in life can be for a woman in a very effective and authentic way. The last thing I'll add is that Fool's Gold was filmed by Jean-Luc Godard, just as Down There was filmed by Francois Truffaut. There's a French New Wave film of Fool's Gold, but it's not nearly as dark. I think Godard casting Anna Karina as sort of the caring character within Band of Outsiders or Bande apart, he was in love with her, and so he wasn't going to show that desperate side of life in this film in the way that the book does. The book, I think, was has a much deeper horror to it than Godard's film does, but I'd encourage you to check that out as well. So this was Fool's Gold by Dolores Hitchens. Thanks, everybody.